Editorial today on my book, Kyrios Relativity. Uh, it happens to be available at Profi.me for sale. Uh, Albert Einstein, importantly, somebody that I admired, um, was right in many ways and also wrong in two very specific ways. The first being Collatist relativity, the second one being valid oral relativity. I elaborate on it in the book. Um, I'm motivated by those that are elite in their hopes, elite in their aspirations, elite in their focus, elite in their meaning and purpose on different ways to live. There are various estimates. Some of the most credible come from E.O. Wilson, that estimated, the late great E.O. Wilson, that estimated that there were 66 tribes of shepherds with 66 distinct ways of living and ways of being that had their own articulations of natural law. And some of those traditions, motivated me and also acted as a sounding board as I explored relativity. I arose to the lack of a mark of quality on this great need. Not knighthoods, nor perfection, nor medicine, nor quality brands occur together by accident or by chance. These take human-centered design, empathy, harmony, patience, planning, and proof. The knight who's set a stake in the ground, who has otherwise pulled up stakes for something better, who has, as you look back, sharpened a blade against the leopard that ate his loved one, and sharpened it for love, for solace, for revenge, as in no small part marked the upward trend of mankind. I arose this great need where our own description of gravity, described by Isaac Newton, and his otherwise brilliant articulations of gravity, had a blessed and pure descriptive description, but it was in the timing signature of capiche time, rather than the timing signature of true time. That distinction happens to be critical. We have been a species projecting our own timing signature onto apples, and have been projecting our timing signature onto stage one life and onto inanimate objects, as if the timing signature of the universe is the same for those objects as they are for us. This change in our understanding of gravity, and this rise of the term century to define attractive potential energy between masses, the true timing signature of terrestrial events that are determined in engineering, medical science, and medicine. To be precise, to be determinative in engineering, medical science, and medicine. And this area has not reduced our need for knights, it has increased it. I rose to this great need where even brilliant articulations of Newton, such as Einstein, who not only projected the timing signature of stage 2 life here in capiche time onto apples, but also projected this timing signature onto the universe, as if we had come before the dazzling shifts of mass and energy straddling across these two colati, as if we humble stage 2 life, we Homo sapiens, had a percussion section that played on beat for beat with the timing signature of the planet all along. We didn't. I elaborated on this throughout this book. We instinctually know that we are not perceiving events faster than the planet, faster than the galaxy, faster than the universe is beating, where that's not possible. We have become wise that the timing signature of the universe must be beating faster than we are perceiving it. This is not a disenchanting story of a young people from a young place with limited possibilities. It is part of a story of enchanting the infinite universe, where there were men that felt the world was only 6,000 years old and felt that the sun orbited the earth. Only now we can be enchanted by our own understanding that this beat for beat against the strong energy, the weak energy, the rigiditas, the inrigiditas, the century, and other electrostable to electrostatic energies under this blue sky above the terrestrial planet teemed with stage 2 life. The enchanting experience of our species with the timing signature of the universe has not reduced our need for knights, it has increased it. I awoke to this great need where the Galilean coordinate system of birds was commingled with the Galilean coordinate system of a railway, where the theropods, the birds, had sacrificed and suffered under calamity, had either true time projected on them, or capiche time projected at the railway in classical relativity, or even, these brilliant articulations leave us with questions of What is the timing signature for theropods, for Homo sapiens, for railways, for things that man's made, and how are they different from the rest of the universe? And those are questions that we set out to answer in Kyrios Relativity. I rose to the great need that where the Earth and stage one life was elapsing in true time, we in our brains are only perceiving it in capiche time. In ethereal ways, this is a remarkable yawn for us. The lion of our planet, where we inherited the position like the lion had long before us. If you look back anthropologically, Homo sapiens died of lions, panthers, in no small and no insignificant way through history. And that anthropological finding is punctuated by huge portions of Homo sapien tribes breaking free of that tutelage under panthers to where we are in this current time and place where they exist almost entirely in the zoo, where we raise money to keep them from going extinct. And that's not what the archaeological record is filled with. There are all kinds of primates that were preyed on by panthers, and it happens to be those particular animals preyed on weaker, smaller animals in a way that we wouldn't describe as honorable, looking back. And we're the tribe that didn't just take it from the panther. We're the tribe that turned to the panther and said that we're not going to frickin' take it. And that difference in our tribe and our species of understanding like good from evil, I think is really important. Maybe you'll agree with me. I rose to this great need for communication. The Pony Express is the romantic telling of our race to deliver the mail on a far-off western night. That story happens to originate from horse shepherds. That's one of the 66 to 103 separate shepherd traditions that had their own story, that had their own natural law. The use of a horse, of a living, breathing companion, gives some of the story of adventure of that people. It's a 50,000-year-old or more story. Not everybody knows that the horse is American. The horse is from here. The horse is ours. That there were hunters that came to America and looked at that animal and hunted it to extinction. The relatives of that horse escaped out Beringia, out the land bridge, on down the steppes of Siberia into the outstretched hands of a Jagfetic-speaking or ancient Lithuanian-speaking first knight that said, "What did they do to you, girl?" That particular transition after hunting the panther is like the second most important milestone for our species, where we went not from just defending ourselves against panthers, but in becoming shepherds and shepherds on the hoof. And that leads into this tradition of a natural law telling. For, like we said, there's 66 to 103 iterations of that story. As much as I love Albert Einstein, it simply doesn't represent the closest truth, and happens to not include the breadth of our species having, we were hunted by panthers. You have to explain what changed. You have to explain how Homo sapiens came to dominate flocks and domesticate animals, because there's hundreds of thousands of years with none of that activity happening. But we hunted the panther, we domesticated the horse, and then we turned to rule the world. That particular telling of our anthropology happens to be so important in describing natural law. Because in quantum physics, we are articulating those things that are extranatural. The things that are extranatural, in some cases, might look unnatural. might look supernatural, and that's that is the state of science. Is we leave it at it it's extra natural. Now sorting those events between extra natural, supernatural, unnatural happens to be worthy of a natural law, and that's what we've written in Kyrios Relativity, is articulating that there are some extra natural findings in physics and in other sciences that Albert Einstein described correctly as quantum, that Niels Bohr described as quantum, and getting to the point of when was there a non-extranatural finding in our species in natural law. And that has to be extraordinarily important. You can see there was a period of time where Homo sapiens were dominated by panther. There's a period of time where we then domesticated the horse. And then as you look back into our recorded history, you can see the talent of horse shepherds is extraordinarily important, where we are in a dominant position relative to other animals. Which, as you look anthropologically back at Homo sapien, you don't, more than 50,000, 200,000 years ago, you do not see epics of Homo sapiens dominating other animals. You see us being eaten alive by large cats. And that happens to be important. Those milestones are important in differentiating good natural law. I arose to the great need for good doctors, for good engineers, for good medical scientists. If you can find meaning and purpose in these meditations of this most exciting articulation of the mechanics, of the quantum mechanics of our universe, you can find meaning and purpose in the next step in your journey, the next step in my journey, the next step in our journey perfecting the systems of us as a people, perfecting our species, our nation, in perfecting the brain of American medicine. My discovery of Kyrios Relativity originates from the success of my book series, Perfecting the Brain of American Medicine, and my passion for discovering, all of those good doctors and partnering with all those good doctors, as well as looking at the empirical findings of physicists, where again physicists have appealed to extra-natural explanations for some of our findings in physics, which is critically important. I arose to this great need for perfection. Perfection presents increasingly through the maths, medical science, and medical algorithms. Medical science and medical scientists are the highest judge of our species, irrelative of how distant, other systems are. I rose to the great need for new scapes, new architectures, new engineers, new medical scientists, physicians. There were ancient parks of herbaceous gardens that our ancestors traversed across in leisure and as gentlemen knights. These are the men that came to build castles, in building positions worth defending, in building places worth living, as we have, and as these 66 to 103 tribes have done over some thousands of years in trying to create places worth living. I had visions of us in America as a new nation upon like Roman imperial red judgeships of the long robe style, folks that have the knowledge of natural law, of medical science law, of physiology law. There were long robes in the ancient world worn by the top caste surgeons. Today, that style of long robe is given away to folks that were Bar Association accredited graduates, which doesn't trace back to our founding, doesn't trace back to the root of any one of our tribes, and traces back instead to Civil War Reconstruction, and which is a bummer for those of us that grew up to believe in the Bar Association individuals. The institutions will hold good, and so We do not construct a nation by making surgeons from barbers, but by rejecting barber surgery, uh, by rejecting barber law, by rejecting barber natural law, um, and by rejecting them everywhere, everywhere, everywhere in our culture, and instead embracing the highest in science, the highest in knowledge, the highest in natural law. We embark to selecting this long robe of excellence as we build a nation with carefully concealed um, collaborative inclusion of the 66 to 103 separate traditions of horse shepherds on through the other lines of shepherds. This winning, unbreakable, unbendable America um, blends in with the white lab coats and the black robes, the chess pieces to capture for this new executive knights, executive kunigas, ancient Lithuanian class of executive clergy kings. Those really worthy of ruling the world, for lack of a better word. I arose to the great need for suspect, for physicians, medical scientists, and engineers, for goosespect, for reaching the everyman. Goosespect comes from the ancient Lithuanian, the ancient Jagfetic word goose, meaning the tastemaker, the one that chooses, the one that decides. It's also an acronym built upon, like my Baconian empirical method, suspect, which is system energy units. Seconds as in time. Process for those events that are one-directional and non-reversible. Expectations, as in human expectations. Cycles, as in those repeatable events. And topologies, which are repeatable and also reversible. Which those distinctions and causal descriptions are missing in the training for the vast majority of our professionals, and that happens to be problematic. The acronym happens to be more important than E equals MC squared. Applying that method everywhere in our culture and everywhere in our society is central to the hard work that still needs to be done. I rose to the great need for perfecting medicine, perfecting the brand of American medicine. Anthropologically, we have not been a perfecting medicine species. That's what we should become. Becoming a perfecting medicine species doesn't spontaneously occur. It's never spontaneously occurred, not among any species, not any tribe that we know of. And so that's going to take management to get us there. That management is natural. The nature of that management is lawful. Those laws are knowable. We've tried to lay the foundation in perfecting the brand American medicine, my 3-book series, and then inspiring the worthy in natural law with this Kyrios Relativity. I rose to the great need for describing the timing signature of the universe, for medical science, for engineers, for physicians. Century was first described by Isaac Newton in his articulation of gravity. Century is a separate term from gravity. Gravity is a description of events of two or more masses that is described in Capiche, described at the timing signature of our own minds. While that happens to be interesting, the universe doesn't articulate gravitational events in Homo sapien timing signatures. The universe has its own timing signature. Those events are going on at a different timing signature. That distinction is, Homo sapiens projecting gravity onto inanimate objects, which is it's a causal flaw. It's a natural law flaw that has to be like a scientific flaw in Einstein's articulation. I elaborate on that in Kyrios Relativity 3. But essentially, the universe has a timing signature that's separate from the timing signature of our mind. The realization that there's a separate Kyrios relativity for century doesn't decrease our need for nights; it increases it. The fact that there's inanimate objects, including machines, that function at a timing signature faster than a human mind, doesn't decrease our need for nights; it increases it. Our thirst for quality products has not decreased our need for nights; it's increased it. I rose to the great need for authority, leading expectations, which is my quality improvement methodology, where there are, what makes great nations. I elaborate on, what those authorities are in perfecting the brand American medicine. There are many other linguistic nations, and some of those other shepherd traditions that E.O. Wilson was talking about included the ancient Greek, Latin, Old French, Old Prussian, Cuman, Kievan Rus, Rus, Finland, Sweden. The list goes on and on. There are so many traditions of shepherds elsewhere in the world that some folks have forgotten that the idea of America was to harvest the best of shepherding ideas and the best of natural law and synthesize them. And I became humbled by that. I rose to the great need for brand inurement. Brand equity is what makes a nation. It is the roster, the value, the actuarial appraisals of disease and how we cure those diseases, how we divert, how we prevent diversion, of schedule narcotics from the design of our facilities. I have a whole chapter dedicated to diversion prevention and perfecting the brand American medicine. I arose to the great need for the rise of Kyrios, the rise of perfecting the brand American medicine, where these two, can mean the end of military engagement. That we do not need large military engagement does not vitiate our species' need for nights, it increases it. I rose to the great need for topometry, a conferring of terrestrial physics with the universe of measurements. Topometry requires us to confer, to bring together the correct arrangement of pages as we bind the book of the universe into two kolati. Einstein described only one kolati, with 3 dimensions in a fusion with 10. Our models of the universe insist that 90% of what's elsewhere in the universe is not in those 3 geometric dimensions, are not in the acoustic collatus. And that means that they're in the opacit collatus. This articulation, I think, is simple, clear, straightforward, elaborated further in Kyrios Relativity. I rose to the great need for a language of acceleration, the simultaneous zonometry, or gyrometry, or girding, the enclosing of the universe in time. So bound across 2 kolati is proven problematic for other authors, where there are not neutral terms, for example, for acceleration. Ancient Lithuanians, prior to the origin of ancient Greek and Latin, did have some of these words. It happens to be a linguistic tribe with remarkably stable linguistic provenance going back to horse shepherds and domestication of the first horse. Those people that purchased horses in the ancient world spread the language of acceleration and other features of horses. Some monks, writers, authors incorrectly describe that language as Proto-Indo-European, despite the fact that Proto fails the causal explanation of that language, that the people that spoke that language were not proto; they were active agents in spreading the language. And Indo, it happened to, Sanskrit is borrowed from Jagvedic. Sanskrit is dated. Sanskrit is young. There's not a good reason to credit, shepherding to Indo. Shepherding originates, at least for horses, in the Ural Mountains. That's where all the archaeological evidence points. The linguistic evidence points to Lithuanians as having the oldest, slowest changing language, which, where the words trace back equos, meaning horse, where the Greek borrowed in the word Hippocrates. And so we can give Lithuanians credit for what's ancient Lithuanian. We didn't deprive the Greeks of their ancient language. And instead of calling it ancient Greek, call it, proto, ancient Mediterranean, which would be an insult to the Greeks. And we reject fundamentally the idea of insulting the Greeks or the Lithuanians. So the closest living language to that happened, the language of acceleration is Lithuanian from before 1905, the Common Era. There is Jagvedic, which is an ancient iteration of Lithuanian. I arose this great need not just to confer, but carry together terrestrial physics and medical science, physicians, engineers, need, with the universe of measurements in this Kyrios relativity. We have, these findings in the physical sciences that are not explained by the prevailing theory of natural law. And so, it took effort to clearly articulate what those problems are and how they're resolved in natural law in ways that satisfy Occam's razor, ways that are parsimonious. And, I was, on this journey and trying to perfect the brand American medicine and, stepped into special relativity on accident. But I'm delighted to be able to propose the solutions. In describing the universe, we're simultaneously binding one or more analogous book or kolati. Einstein was so confident that there was one kolati. Our empirical findings are that there is more than one. In describing the universe, we're binding this book. There's the collating, meaning to born, to carry, to verify together, the correct arrangement, analogously, of pages, or folio, or to use, describe physics, we're arranging one or more collatas, where the, plural would be collatae, which comes from the ancient Lithuanian root bear, B-H-E-R, to carry, a frame for carrying a load, to carry a load. The Latin collatus includes connotations to bring together and compare, examine critically as to agreement with the form of com, with, together, plus the suffix latus, being borne or carried. Specifically, in bookbinding in the universe, we must frame, if there is one, two, or more collati, we have to verify the correct arrangement of the universe. It is a central thesis of Kyrios relativity that there are two collati, not one but two. There's a special collatus. There is a second collatus, to be precise, that is properly described as opacic. There is no sound there. There's no vibration there. There's no century there. I chose the term century because of the term gravity includes both the attractive potential energy between masses over the radius between the two masses squared in the inverse power law, and other energies that are detectable only in special cases inclusive of rigidus energy. Our discovery of two collati has not reduced our need for nights in their natural life, it's increased it. Galileo Galilei worked for the Medici our family happens to descend of Catherine de' Medici. We're happy to say the Medici had popes, had bankers, and had Catherine de' Medici. We're delighted to have her join our family in the 16th century. Um, her predecessors were intimately involved in funding Galileo. Kyrios Relativity grew out of the realization that Galileo Galilei's lab book um, describes gravity. Uh, Einstein refers to it as a Galilean frame. That happens to be extraordinarily important, where Einstein is trying to um, bind the Florentine tradition of natural law with Galileo to his own. That attempt at unification is extraordinarily important in understanding that he's acknowledging the Galilean tradition. If you look at Galileo's data, where Galileo had a distance that was called a punti, and the punti measurements were marked all down a ramp in measuring gravity. And if you look at the curve in punti, it's a very impressive, like accelerating curve of speed that, like a ball, is covering over a period of time. If you happen to look at it as a velocity, you can see that it's an accelerating velocity. And if you take the second derivative and look at Galileo Galilei's gravity from an acceleration perspective, it happens to be imprecise. It happens to the r squared is 0.38, which is extraordinarily low. That's like a social sciences finding. We know that Isaac Newton's description is basically right. We also know that Galileo Galilei basically can't be right. Like with r squared of 38, Galileo Galilei can't be right if the r squared is only 0.38. 0.37 is the r squared. It's far too low to be described as gravity. Now, it's a significant finding. It's an important finding. There are those that say that Galileo Galilei's finding has to be right. That particular position is acceptable in some medical sects, and will be seen as acceptable in some medical sects because Galileo Galilei was tabula rasa. He happened to not have any tutelage of what his findings were going to be. That's a kind of double-blind study. It's a double-blind study that's very difficult to replicate because, Homo sapiens have an almost universal understanding and agreement on, like, at least the gravitational description of acceleration. In perfecting the brand of American medicine, I have warned, we're not automobiles, we're not cell phones, we're not widgets. Humankind is more complicated than the things that we've manufactured for ourselves up to this point. The Kyrios Relativity descriptions of Kyrios Relativity and Valedorol Relativity are elaborated in precise statements thus. Kyrios Relativity is relativity across two colati, and Valedorol Relativity, which is a terrestrial perspective in true time for all physical phenomena inclusive of living things, in the absence of any one energy inclusive of century, the operational replacement of gravity. The description of only one colatus in special relativity neglects the variety of activities known and provable on the opacate colatus, including over 90% of the energy in the universe. events occurring in the defenestration of events, the defenestration events in black holes, and the soul. You can't zip up the acoustic colatus without binding time to both the acoustic colatus and the apastic colatus in a 7-dimension space-time. And there has to be 7 dimensions. That happens to be critical. There happens to not be great evidence of time dilation or time travel. There's very good evidence that there's no time travel, none. Those extrapolations of Einstein's natural law are provably false. The support of his natural law is in covenant. That can be elaborated, and read about elsewhere in my writing. Galileo's gravitational anomaly is a finding that is stubborn. Where relativity relies on a Galilean frame. The finding from Galileo was a quantum finding itself. Why is it that the R squared was 0.37? Which is far too low to put all the weight of physics on. That there are those that'll say that Galileo had experimental errors, that there were minor quality errors in his methods or in his execution, and those are acceptable explanations. That also isn't how empiricism works. You can't say it's a Galilean frame, and then you go and look at the data that Galileo gave, and it's basically 63% wrong, from a causal perspective. And, bless Einstein, but, the Galileo's finding, his data was 63% wrong. And 63% didn't explain what we describe as gravity. And it was fundamentally a quantum finding, one that had extraordinary error. You could call it an extranatural finding. That would be the most accurate. That would be safe. But it falls into the category of quantum findings, and so it's not a hefty enough finding to say, well, he proved Newton's gravity. Now Newton's gravity is easily proved. Galileo, though, is an attempt at Einstein of merging the Florentine tradition and the English tradition from a Swiss perspective, which is an admirable effort. And it's why it's been so lasting. But getting it precise is also important. So authors haven't elaborated on if there was a second energy operating on the ball rolling down the ramp on Galileo that resulted in that 63% R squared. And that's something that, in natural law, we find rather important, is when we look at the data, we're looking for a full explanation. The profound difference in timing signature of Capich time from true time means that there is a valid oral relativity, where there's new perspectives that allow us to unite the knowledge of terrestrial physics with what we know about physics in the universe. Valid oral relativity includes gravitational anomalies, which require us, not just in this law of century, which is the second book of relativity, of Kyrios Relativity, but describe gravitational anomalies in light of the universe functioning at a separate timing system, signature of our own minds. And see, the universe is operating at 1 beat per 1 beat. And our minds are at some discount of that, basically. Like our minds are working slower than the universe itself. Which is the more reasonable explanation, is that Galileo wasn't flawed, but Galileo is thinking with the human mind, where he had multiple sources of error in medical science law and physiological law, including detecting the movements of his own ball. Kyrios relativity is a menu of main variables, properties, features of physics, omitting any one variable, property feature across the acoustic colatus, opacity colatus, across the two simultaneous timing signatures, across four perspectives: temporal, valadoral, cerebral, and hariordinal. These four distinct perspectives of time are critical upgrades on our understanding of the universe. There are those that believe there was only one perspective on time, when there are two or more simultaneous timing signatures across two colatus of the universe. These four distinct perspectives are a better remedy of explaining physics and describing Kyrios relativity, the menu of main variables, is a more appropriate description of how science works. Those of us that understood Sir Francis Bacon know, that a menu of main variables minus one, that's what scientific inquiry is. I think we've articulated that well. Colatus relativity is the three dimensions on the acoustic colatus in a k coordinate system, and the second colatus in a y coordinate system, which we describe as opacic colatus, meaning literally colatus impervious to light, the quality of a colatus which renders it impervious to rays of light. If relative to k and y, k prime is a uniformly moving coordinate system, then k prime and y prime as natural objects run their course with respect to k prime according to exactly the same general laws as with respect to k and y. The defenestration of matter, k prime, for example, into a plustra y prime, is a coordinate system k prime that enters coordinate system y. In Regatus energy from coordinate system y can impact events in coordinate system k and y. These statements are called the principle of colatus relativity in the restricted sense. Valadoral relativity is a terrestrial perspective in true time, with omitting any one variable property feature of vagosity, which is the ancient Lithuanian word, the Jagvedic word for velocity. It originates from veg, to go, to move, to transport, specifically in a vehicle, which is a very useful, meaning-rich term, for acceleration, for velocity. So valadoral relativity is a terrestrial perspective in true time, while omitting any one or more variable property feature of vagosity, of a hariordinal or valadoral perspective in a seven-dimensional reference frame, binding two coladi at a time, including any second or more object in a separate perspective. As in an operational definition where there are two subject objects experiencing two different timing signatures, it does not vitiate the natural law that these timing signatures co-occur in one. That could include any second or more object, including capiche time, capiche time is our biological perception of reality. The perception of our minds. Not the perception of our mitochondria, which happens to be an important distinction. Our mitochondria are functioning closer to the timing signature of true time. And, by physics, must. By medical science, really must. But our minds are functioning at some discount. It's just something that must be humbling for us. That our minds don't move at the timing signature of the universe. You can't get a conception, a conceptual model of the universe where our minds are moving at the pace of the universe. There's some timing signature change. Well, the arrow of time is universal between the two. If relative to k and y, k prime is a uniformly moving living Homo sapien, and capiche time, wishing to understand physics, for example, of a patient ambulating, and must view experimental results in a true time coordinate system, the results could be slowed down artificially 10,000 times. Then k prime and y prime as natural objects run their course with respect to k prime according to exactly the same general laws with respect to k prime, with respect to k and y, to be precise. Though, if there's a possibility that if the rigidus basket of services k prime or k or y prime is present, that it could impact the results. These statements are called the principle of valid oral relativity, inclusive of artificial valid oral, as in replay. As in, there's special conditions in what I describe elsewhere as a rigidus basket of services that explain these quantum findings or these extranatural findings, and the relative inclusion or omission of that rigidus basket of services is critical in defining extranatural from natural, defining quantum from classical physics. Temporal relativity is a terrestrial perspective in Capich time with omitting any one variable property feature of Vegg's velocity. Again, from that ancient Lithuanian word for velocity, originates from Vegg's, meaning to be strong, to be lively, of a hairy ordinal or valid oral perspective in a 7-dimensional reference frame, including any second or more object in a separate perspective. As an operational definition, when there are two subject objects experiencing two different timing signatures, it does not vitiate the natural law that these timing signatures co-occur in one, and it does not vitiate the biological primacy over his own body. So this perspective, it could include any second or more object, including Capich time, which is our biological perception reality, in a temporal or serial perspective. If relative to k and y, k prime is a uniformly moving living Homo sapien in Capich time, wishing to understand physics, must view experimental results in a true time coordinate system. The results will be slowed down 10,000 times. Then k prime and y prime as natural objects run their course with respect to k prime, according to exactly the same general laws with respect to k and y, though if there is a possibility that if the rigidus basket of services k prime or y prime is present, that it could impact the results. Where the rigidus basket of services on the k coordinate system on the acoustic collatus or y on the impassive collatus are able to cause those results. These statements are called the principle of temporal relativity, where we've amended the precise statement on the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which happens to be a finding without a defined mechanism. But we know that the rigidus basket of services clearly articulates those conditions in the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. There's a long-standing proven variation between true time and Capich time that can be illuminated by a new decamilligesimal calculus, elaborated in my next publication. Decamilligesimal calculus, for those that are worthy, those that are chosen to become my knights, includes the removal of your self-incurred tutelage that the universe operates at our time, at the time and signature of our mind. Some call that disenchanting. There are things that are true that have been mildly disenchanting through history, including that the Earth revolves around the Sun, and the Sun doesn't revolve around the Earth, basically. That our galaxy happens to not be the center of the universe. It's slightly disenchanting. The reality that our mind is not moving at the timing signature of the universe is a little disenchanting, but it's true, and has to be true. There is a decamilligesimal calculus of Kyrios relativity that for natural life, and I humbly submit that it is a necessary and prudent amendment to Newtonian calculus, which is elaborated in a later book, where the timing signature change between the universe and our own thought is the most significant finding in articulating natural law that has not permeated throughout all of our 66 to 103 tribes. But it happens to be right. It happens to be true. It also happens to be good. In like Einstein's words, it holds good. It's a superior explanation to our projections of time in the universe um, over time dilation, and is a superior explanation and hypothesis over time travel. Two things that we've not observed except at the fringes of science. Everyone in science knows, like you see in the encyclopedia, that the range of 10 to the negative 15th power meters, the strong energy is approximately 137 times as strong as electromagnetism, 10 to the 6 times as strong as the weak interaction, 10 to the 36 times as strong as gravitation. Our tutelage of gravity and our own data are only united with the decamilligesimal calculus of Kyrios relativity at our temporal perspective, which means, at the timing signature of our mind, as opposed to the timing signature of the universe. Universe views gravity differently. It views it as a century at the timing signature of the universe, whereas we view it from the timing signature of our mind, which happens to not be the timing signature that events occur. It's not the timing signature that physical events occur, and so we perceive it as an accelerating force. It is over long enough periods of time, but if you look at gravitational events on Earth in true time, the acceleration is occurring, but the acceleration is occurring so slowly that the events are better described as like an electrostatic energy. The gravitational pull between the planet Earth and objects on it are better described as like two electrostable elements with like an electrostatic pull between them. That happens to unite electromagnetism in a meaningful way with what is described as gravity, with the caveat that Homo sapiens kind of got it wrong because our minds are at a different timing signature in the universe itself. This is important. It's knowledge that's useful for scientists, for engineers, for medical scientists. It's also humbling. The finding of century, in Kyrios relativity doesn't decrease our need for nights. It increases it. If relative to K and S, K prime is a uniformly moving coordinate system without angular momentum in Kapitsch R prime, and S prime is a uniformly operating coordinate system in true time, O prime, where at K prime and S prime natural objects run their course on simultaneous and distinct timing signatures with respect to living subject K prime. In temporal or surreal, R prime is 1 beat to 10,000 beats timing signature with a note value that represents a beat, where we have, for example, 10,000 as our beat unit and 1 beat constituting a measure, a bar, according to exactly the same general laws with respect to K and S. Simultaneously, object S prime in Valedorel or Hairy ordinal O prime is 1 beat per 1 beat timing signature with a note value that represents a beat, where Y prime has, for example, 1 as our beat unit and 1 beat constituting a measure or a bar according to the exact same general laws as with respect to K and S. This statement is called the principle of Kyrios timing signature relativity in the restricted sense. It happens to be remarkably important when you're looking at the human interface with the environment around us, is that our mind is not functioning at the timing signature of the universe around us. It's immediately central to the fields of psychology, to the fields of engineering, to any interface between our bodies and our environment around us, and it explains the actuarial data that humans engage in certain errors. For example, orthopedic injuries, which is part of how I stumbled into this particular problem. And I was blessed to work with so many of the orthopedic surgeons that allowed me to work for them and arrive at that particular description of natural law. I elaborate on qualitative celerity. Celerity is an ancient Jagvedic word meaning acceleration without having a preconceived idea using the word gravity. So I elaborate on celerity properties in Kyrios Relativity, the series. Century is my precise term for Newton's description of gravity, minus any non-zero remissivity that we didn't detect in experiments such as Galileo's. Again, Galileo's findings had 63% error, which, you can imagine a world where Galileo was entirely right, and that Galileo was confronted with a rigorous basket of services, and that there was an event that made his data and his finding perfect. And that's part of what is important in describing natural law. We don't have a way to look at Galileo in depth. We don't have we'll say we don't have the Holy Grail to be able to look at his data precisely. But that is the impasse of natural law. Is you'd have to be able to look at a Holy Grail that has a recording of Galileo's work to be able to audit it. Century has the property of celerity, swiftness, rapidity in motion, which comes to us from the Old French celerity, from Latin celeritatem. Swiftness, from celer, which is swift, from the Greek celes, which was a fast horse, and later a fast ship. Old High German skelo, meaning stallion, from ancient Lithuanian keli, as in speeding, as seen in contemporary Lithuanian swilhali, which is a gallop. Century was described by Isaac Newton as articulations of gravity. He had a pure deductive description, but it was in the timing signature of Capich time rather than the timing signature of true time. So he was projecting his perception of time, from his mind onto inanimate objects, which you'll see later that this is problematic. Again, if you look at the motions of the planets in our galaxy, in our solar system, it's a rather simple thing that Mercury is closer to the Sun than Venus, that Venus is closer to the Sun than Earth, that we're all, orbiting the Sun at a, elliptical pattern. That was not the natural law in one of our tribes. In the case of Copernicus, we had Greek tribes that had that finding earlier. The description that there's 66 to 103 separate shepherd traditions holds good, where different tribes described that reality of planets orbiting the sun at different rates and at different paces, but were in each case reported as true. And that finding that the planets are orbiting the sun is perhaps disenchanting, but doesn't change the fact that it's right. So as you look at, Isaac Newton, Isaac Newton is basically right. I elaborate on, Galileo elsewhere. It's possible Galileo's right. What Einstein's really trying to do is unify the Italian, we call it Italian tradition, or the Florentine tradition would be more appropriate, with the English tradition, and his own knowledge of the Swiss tradition. Which again is a very admirable attempt. The realization, though, that our minds are perceiving events at Capich time and not at true time is the central unreported finding. And that difference in that distinction of how many beats of the universe match the number of beats perceived by Homo sapiens, by other, we'd say like stage 2 species, is the distinction that we're looking for in a relativity. It helps unify engineering with astrophysics. Because again, astrophysicists say like 90% of the energy that you see in the universe is not visible. Um, and you start getting close to how that explanation can become true. Um, and so, Kyrios' main energy relativity is accepting of concrete empirical proof of century by way of celerity, with the caveat that these events occur terrestrially at true time in what is valid oral perspective, or occur non-terrestrially at true time in a hairy ordinal perspective. And that distinction is important because we're perceiving events in what we describe as a temporal order. That's been our natural law terminology for like capiche time events, and it happens to be essential for how we interact with each other and how we interact with machines, how we interact with nature, and in our law. Whereas we're terrestrial viewers, we in our observations going forward choose the valid oral perspective for medical science, for physicians, for patient events, inclusive of orthopedics, for example, engineering events inclusive of building bridges, for example. This most human movement for valid oral perspective under Kyrios relativity has not reduced our need for nights, it's increased it. The lack of valid oral perspective in classical relativity is why it is absent on the shelf of our physicians and our engineers, where such an indelible work of physics should have been necessary. Natural law should be necessary. Classical relativity had observations, mathematical engineering and otherwise, about the universe that were not an improvement on the trial and error heuristics that we have used to explore medical science, care for patients, construct things. In capiche time, we accept gravity in this restricted sense as long as there is not a second or more energy at work. Kyrios.